Welcome to Lost Relation Chronicles.
I'll never forget that day. The second I walked through the door, something felt wrong. The air was still, like the calm before a storm, but I could hear a faint murmur from upstairs. My heart dropped, and I climbed the stairs, each step heavier than the last. I couldn't ignore the voices, hushed but unmistakable, coming from our bedroom. The bedroom Kathy and I had shared for 3 years. I pushed the door open, and there they were, Kathy, tangled up with her ex-husband. My blood ran cold as I stared at them, disbelief and anger twisting together in my chest. The second I saw them, something inside me snapped. I didn't even remember making the decision. I was just suddenly on top of him. Roger tried to back away, hands up, but I grabbed him by the shirt and threw him against the wall. His face was pale, his eyes wide, but I didn't care. I could feel every ounce of betrayal and fury pouring out of me, every blow fueled by the realization that my wife, the woman I'd given everything to, had betrayed me with him. He stammered out a few words, maybe trying to apologize or beg, but I cut him off with a fist to his jaw, then another to his gut. I didn't even care if he fought back. I didn't care about the pain in my knuckles, didn't care if I was going too far. All I wanted was for him to understand, to feel even a fraction of what he'd taken from me. At some point, Kathy screamed, but it barely registered. The only sound I heard was my own breathing, ragged and deep, as I grabbed him again, pushing him toward the door. "Get out," I spat, my voice so low and filled with rage I barely recognized it. He stumbled, a hand to his bruised face, before bolting out, looking back only once before he disappeared. When he was gone, I stood there, chest heaving, fists clenched so tight they hurt. It was like a dam had broken, and as the adrenaline drained, I looked at Kathy. She stood there, silent and pale, the reality of what she'd done hanging heavy in the air. The silence that followed was colder than anything I'd ever felt. I didn't say anything. I just started grabbing her clothes, her things, every single thing that belonged to her, and throwing them out on the street. She tried to stop me, but I ignored her, locked in some instinct to cleanse every part of our life together that felt like a lie. When I was done, I called my mother and told her to come get Kathy. She had nowhere else to go, and frankly, I didn't care. I needed her gone from my life, out of our home, because there was nothing left to say. She'd broken something inside me that day, something I don't think could ever be put back together. As I watched her things scattered across the lawn, I knew that whatever we'd had was over. The woman I thought I knew wasn't there anymore, and I couldn't pretend otherwise. When Nancy arrived, she looked around at the mess on the lawn. Kathy's clothes, her shoes, boxes of her things scattered everywhere. She took one look at me, then at the door, and I could see the confusion and worry in her eyes. But she hadn't said a word yet. "Ben," she started cautiously, her voice laced with worry. "What's going on? Where's Kathy?" I took a deep breath, feeling the weight of it all, then met her gaze. "Nancy," I said, my voice low. I caught her, in our bed with Roger. The shock on her face was immediate. She took a step back, her hand covering her mouth as her eyes widened in disbelief. With Roger?" Her voice was barely above a whisper, as if saying it out loud would make it worse. I nodded, jaw tight. "I walked in and found them, Nancy, in my bed." I kicked him out and threw her things on the street. She looked down at Kathy's belongings strewn across the lawn, the reality of it all sinking in. "Oh, Ben, I had no idea. I can't believe she would do this. Not to you." Her words felt like an echo of my own thoughts, each one digging a little deeper. "Believe it, Nancy. I saw it with my own eyes," I replied, trying to keep my voice steady. "I don't know what's worse, her doing this or having to see it for myself." She shook her head, still in shock. "I don't know what to say. I can't excuse what she did. I thought," she trailed off, looking at me with something between shame and heartbreak. "I thought she loved you." "I thought so too," I replied bitterly, "but I guess I was wrong. And I need her out, Nancy. I can't look at her, can't look at any of it anymore." Nancy reached out, her hand shaking as she put it on my shoulder. "I'll take her, Ben. I'll talk to her. I'll do whatever needs to be done. I'm so sorry this happened. You didn't deserve this." I just nodded, swallowing down the anger and pain. "Just get her out of here, Nancy. Please." She nodded back, taking one last look at the house before she turned to gather Kathy's things. The next morning, I was in a lawyer's office, sitting across from a man who looked like he'd been through enough divorces to know how this was going to go. His office was clean, efficient, cold, really, like he'd cut emotions out of the equation a long time ago. He barely had a chance to introduce himself before I started to explain what I wanted and what happened. I need this done quickly. No delays, no negotiations, I said firmly, leaning forward. And I want it in writing that I won't be responsible for Kathy's daughter, Lisa. That's her responsibility, not mine. I have nothing to do with her anymore. The lawyer raised an eyebrow, clearly picking up on the weight of what I wasn't saying. He nodded, his pen poised to take notes. All right, Ben. I understand. So, we're talking about a no-fault divorce with a clean split of assets and no further financial responsibility on your end, particularly regarding her daughter. Exactly, I replied. I'm done. Whatever Kathy needs to take, fine. I just want it over with. He nodded, making notes. Given what you've told me, we can definitely expedite things, especially with no children or shared assets to complicate it further. If Kathy's cooperative, we could have this finalized fairly quickly. Good, I said, my voice low. The sooner, the better. The lawyer looked at me with a kind of measured sympathy, not pushing for more details. We'll get this going right away. If anything needs your review or signature, my assistant will contact you. I stood up, shaking his hand firmly, already halfway out the door in my mind. Thank you, I muttered, barely looking back. 3 days later, the papers were served. I knew the moment it happened because my phone lit up with call after call from Kathy. I ignored the first few, letting them go to voicemail, but when she kept calling, I finally picked up, bracing myself. As soon as I answered, her voice exploded on the other end. You think you can just throw me out like garbage, Ben? She screamed. You've ruined my life. How dare you file for divorce and throw my daughter out on the street? You heartless scumsucker. I stayed silent, letting her words spill out while I hit the record button on my phone. I knew better than to respond, but it only made her angrier. You're not getting away with this, she hissed. You think you're so tough, Ben? I'll make your life hell. Don't sleep too comfortably, you never know what might happen to you. Maybe I'll be the last person you ever see. Her voice was venomous, each word dripping with malice. I let her threats keep coming, every word captured. After a few more minutes of her ranting, I couldn't take it anymore. Kathy, I'm done. Stop calling me, I said calmly, then hung up. For a moment, I just sat there, staring at the phone in my hand. Her threats echoed in my mind, and I felt a chill run down my spine. But I took a deep breath, knowing I'd done the right thing by recording it all. The day of the meeting came, and I found myself sitting across the conference table from Kathy and her lawyer. She avoided my gaze, her jaw tight with a barely hidden scowl, while her lawyer looked ready to negotiate. He cleared his throat, looking at some notes. So, we're proposing an alternative arrangement. Given Kathy's financial situation, she requests a monthly maintenance payment. Additionally, we believe it's in Lisa's best interest for you, Ben, to assume some responsibility for her care. After all, she's lived in your household, and it would be disruptive for her to have to relocate. I could hardly believe what I was hearing. I looked at my lawyer, who nodded at me to go ahead. I took a deep breath, leaned forward, and locked eyes with Kathy. Kathy, let's get something straight. I'm not paying you a dime in maintenance. As for Lisa, she's not my responsibility. She never once considered me her father, and I've got no sympathy for her, not anymore. That's between you and Roger. Lisa is your and your ex-husband's problem, not mine. Legally, he is still her father. Kathy's voice took on a pleading tone, her eyes glistening as she looked at me. What am I supposed to tell Lisa, Ben? That her father won't take care of her? That you're abandoning her? I felt a wave of anger rise up, but I held it in, keeping my tone even. Tell her whatever you want, Kathy. But you and I both know the truth. I'm not her father. I was never her father, and Lisa made that very clear from day one. She never accepted me in that role, so don't turn this around now like I'm abandoning her. Kathy's expression shifted, realizing her attempt at guilt-tripping wasn't working. But she lived with us, Ben. You were part of her life whether she wanted it or not. Exactly, I replied, my voice firm. And during that time, she didn't want anything to do with me. I wasn't the father she wanted. That was always Roger. And that's fine, but you don't get to change the story now that it's convenient. Kathy opened her mouth to argue, but I raised a hand. You made choices, Kathy, and so did Lisa. I respected those choices, but now I'm making mine. You and Lisa wanted Roger in that role? Fine, but I'm out. Kathy finally looked up at me, anger flashing in her eyes, but she didn't respond. Her lawyer shifted in his seat, clearly at a loss for words. My lawyer nodded, making notes, and calmly stated, I think that's clear. Let's move forward with the original terms. and Ben will not assume any financial responsibility for Kathy or her daughter. Kathy was seething, her anger almost palpable, but I didn't care. I was ready to close this chapter and leave them both in the past. In court, Kathy tried to put on a whole new act. She told the judge that she was devastated over her mistake and that she wanted to save our marriage. She claimed she'd been desperate for counseling and willing to make amends, but that I had been the one unwilling to work things out. It almost sounded believable, even to me, until she tried to take it a step further. Her tone shifted, becoming more pointed as she glanced over at me. And honestly, Your Honor, Ben was difficult to live with, she said, her voice taking on a note of feigned vulnerability. He could be verbally aggressive and intimidating. Sometimes I felt genuinely unsafe around him. I felt a surge of anger rise up but kept my composure, knowing the truth would come out. My lawyer leaned over and whispered, "Stay calm. She's digging her own grave." The judge looked at Kathy, eyebrows raised, his skepticism clear. "Ms. Harlow, you said you wanted to save your marriage, that you sought counseling and reconciliation," he said slowly, eyeing her closely. "And now you're saying you felt unsafe and that Mr. Carson was abusive?" Kathy shifted uncomfortably, realizing the trap she'd walked into, but she tried to press on. "Yes, I mean, I thought if we could get help, maybe he would change. I just wanted him to be different." The judge's expression didn't soften. "Did you ever file a police complaint or seek assistance from anyone regarding this alleged abuse?" Kathy hesitated, her face paling. "No, I thought we could handle it privately." The judge sighed, looking unimpressed. "So, just to be clear, you're claiming that you were in fear of Mr. Carson, yet you wanted him back and never filed a single complaint?" Kathy was silent, the weight of her lie exposed. The judge glanced at me and then looked back at her. "Ms. Harlow, I'm granting the divorce as originally filed. This court does not look favorably upon dishonesty, especially in matters as serious as these." I let out a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding. Grateful the judge saw right through her performance. It was over, the truth was out, and soon enough, I'd finally be free. 3 months after the divorce was finalized, I thought I was finally free of Kathy and the mess she had brought into my life. But that night, as I sat alone in my house, I heard a strange noise coming from the kitchen. I froze, my pulse quickening as I realized someone was in my home. My mind raced, and without a second thought, I grabbed my phone and called the cops, whispering my address and the situation. I hung up, then went to the safe and retrieved my pistol, holding it tightly as I approached the kitchen. As I stepped into the doorway, I saw them, Kathy and Roger. The shock nearly knocked the breath out of me, but my instincts kicked in. They were both standing there, their faces twisted with something dark, something I'd never seen before. Roger had a knife in his hand, and I didn't have time to think. I raised my gun, my voice steady but firm. "Don't move." Roger lunged, and I didn't hesitate. I pulled the trigger, and he dropped to the ground with a scream, clutching his leg. Kathy froze, eyes wide with terror, as the sound of sirens filled the night air. The cops arrived moments later, pulling Roger to his feet and cuffing him, blood soaking through his pant leg. Kathy was arrested too, her face twisted with rage as they led her out in handcuffs. I gave my statement, still reeling from what had just happened, and it wasn't long before the police got the full story. They'd planned to kill me that night, desperate for revenge, and they both confessed under questioning. It was almost surreal to hear it. How Kathy and Roger had plotted together, driven by spite and twisted anger. They were both sentenced to jail, and for the first time in a long time, I felt a sense of relief. The nightmare was finally over, and I could finally look forward without having them in the shadows, ready to tear me down. Dear listeners, please share your thoughts in the comments section below, and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe.